Hi, everybody. Today is a big day. Happy Monday. The Cold War is going to be at the hottest point that it was throughout the entire duration of the Cold War, from 1945 to 1990. This is it. We're very close to nuclear war. It's getting really intense. The Cold War is heating up. I'm pumped. Let's go. So this lesson is for Monday, April 20th, and you don't have a bell ringer today. You're just going to recap some slides, which I'll go through really quickly. We're going to do three slides, one writing, two pictures. I have some primary sources to talk about, got some pictures for you. It's going to be great. After you watch this video, you have a TED Ed video to watch, another one. It's great. It's titled The Cuban Missile Crisis, because that's what we're talking about, and it's a great one, and it's so good, like all of them. They're amazing. So that link is in the live agenda and the discussion post, or the discussion thread, for you to watch that as well. All right, so let's get started. So quick recap. The last thing we talked about was the Berlin crisis, and that's the slide. You had a TED Ed on that as well, because the Berlin crisis really started when the Berlin Wall was built. Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, is getting very frustrated because the Allies won't recognize won't recognize East Germany as an independent territory, an independent nation, and they won't recognize the fact that he has control of Berlin, right? So he's getting really frustrated, and people are escaping East Berlin and going over to West Berlin and then going into West Germany. And he doesn't like the fact that people are leaving because it's a communist-controlled territory, and he's getting very mad. So he builds the Berlin Wall. We have our picture here. Germany is divided up, West Germany and East Germany, and then Berlin in East-controlled or Soviet-controlled territory. It is divided up, and there is a wall as well. Looked at some pictures, like I said, of that. You also saw some pictures in the video that I posted. There are pieces of the Berlin Wall around the world that we look at to remind us that these things that are built, these physical structures that are built, remind us that anything that is stopping freedom can be taken down and should be taken down, because that's exactly what the Berlin Wall represented, was a stopping of freedom and not allowing people to be free in a democratic country, right, after World War II. So there's that. That's the Berlin Wall. That's the Berlin crisis. It's getting pretty tense, and it's just going to get worse. It's just going to worse. And I have a big smile on my face. So I love the Cold War, guys. I really do. Berlin Wall's up. Oh, JFK is the president, obviously, and he is realizing the seriousness of the situation, and so he creates a secret kind of extra advisory group, which we're going to talk about today, that's going to help him a lot for the coming event, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Button. I don't have it ready. Pretend I just pressed the button. So the Cuban Missile Crisis happens in October 1962. Here we go. Almost the closest we've ever been to nuclear war. So let's read. The Soviets were concerned about nuclear missiles that the United States had placed in Turkey. And Khrushchev saw this as a threat on the Soviet Union's southwestern border. So rather than drawing the pictures, I did realize that I drew them on the board last year for my last year's World Studies class, and I loved it so much because it's beautiful. I took a picture of it, and I still have the picture on my iPad. So I'm going to show it to you. There it is. All right. So this is last year's picture. It's the same. I would have drawn probably something very similar this year. So here it is. We have this also, I just added from the Bay of Pigs. So we have Cuba, and we have the Bay of Pigs, which is an island, or an area, excuse me, like a beach. We have the Bay of Pigs, the CIA, the New York Times is going to release this information about the invasion. It's going to fail. There's Florida, 90 miles from Cuba. It's very close. It's going to get tense. And this is Cuba, Turkey, the United States. This face right here represents the Soviet Union. So because we now have Nikita Khrushchev working with Fidel Castro the United States is getting very scared, especially because Castro or Nikita Khrushchev can put weapons in Cuba since they're working together, and it's very close to the United States, and that's going to stress us out. So what we do is we put nuclear weapons in Turkey, which is very close to Russia, very close, because we're friends with Turkey, and we put nuclear weapons right there. And Khrushchev's like, oh, that's a direct threat to me, so I'm going to put nuclear weapons in Cuba. So you'll see this demonstrated so beautifully in the picture. This is Turkey, and that right there says bombs. So we put nuclear weapons in Turkey, pointed at the Soviets. The Soviets put bombs in Cuba, nuclear weapons in Cuba, pointed at us. Tense. United States puts nuclear weapons in Turkey, pointed at the Soviets. The Soviets put nuclear weapons in Cuba, pointed at us. And the Soviets are like, haha, what's going on? And they're watching us, and they are trying to threaten us. And we're like, can we please calm down, please? This is getting really intense and terrifying. So there's that picture. Back to the slides. We put nuclear weapons in Turkey, and Khrushchev's like, that's a threat to me. So he puts weapons in Cuba. Now, the type of weapons that he puts in there are defense missiles. They're not. They're offensive missiles, meaning like they can attack first, not defense weapons, meaning like they attack when they are attacked. They're called surface-to-air missiles, or SAMs. And Khrushchev is saying, hey, United States, I'm only putting weapons in Cuba because you're threatening me by putting weapons in Turkey. These are defensive missiles. You led me to do this. I'm defending myself. Not true. So John F. Kennedy orders U-2 spy planes to fly over Cuba to try and see if they are in fact offensive weapons and not defensive weapons. And we were right. They are offensive weapons, and they can fire whenever. They don't have to be attacked first. And that makes us very scared. And this starts the Cuban Missile Crisis. The reason why it's called the Cuban Missile Crisis is because all the while this is going on, and we have planes flying over Cuba, and we realize, like, wow, they're putting missiles there. Khrushchev is still sending in missiles, and he's still sending in weapons. So while these weapons are just like in the middle of the ocean on their way to Cuba, we're like, can we please stop? Like, we haven't fired anything at you. The reason why we put missiles in Turkey is because you're getting very close to us in Cuba. Nobody said anything about firing any nuclear weapons, and he's still sending them over. So the Cuban Missile Crisis is a span of a week, and it's just basically a high period of tension between the Soviet Union and the United States. Are we going to go to nuclear war? What's going to happen? What's Khrushchev talking about? What is Kennedy talking about? And essentially what happens is both of them like write letters to each other. They call each other up. They send messages to each other like through the media, because Kennedy's going to give a speech on TV. Khrushchev's going to give a speech on TV. It's going to be really intense. So Kennedy responds to the nuclear weapons in Cuba and the fact that Khrushchev is still sending those weapons over by putting 550 bombers armed with nuclear weapons in the air, right? Because we do have an arsenal that just like flies around just in case anything were to happen. And 100,000 troops in Georgia to prepare for war and to show Khrushchev the seriousness of the situation. That is insane. Like, we're not messing around. Like, this is very serious, and you're continuing to put nuclear weapons in Cuba, which is only 90 miles from us. I want to show you some of these pictures here. So when I went to John F. Kennedy's museum in Boston, they had like a whole exhibit on the Cuban Missile Crisis and like the Berlin Crisis, and I was in heaven. It was amazing. So this is a map that Kennedy would have in his office or in the meeting room with his organization, and you can see, like, I don't know if you can see, but if you look on your own iPad, there's like red markings all over the place to identify where the nuclear missiles are, and because they got that information from the spy planes. And actually there is a true story of some of our pilots being shot down by like the Soviet Union, because if we saw a spy plane, like, if they saw a spy plane, they'd shoot it down because they don't want the information to get back to the United States. And like holding our pilots hostage. We'll talk more about that next week. The organization that, like the advisory group that JFK formed, is called XCOM, and they would have meetings every single day during the Cuban Missile Crisis to try and figure out what to do and to how to like defuse the situation because it was getting so tense and it was escalating so quickly. This piece of paper right here is a picture of JFK's notes. Like, he would take notes during meetings, and he has circled a lot of things. He's crossed out things, and I have on there in the top right corner, the word missile is circled and written 3 times. So that must have been like pretty serious. And this is his chair, and this is him sitting in it with all his advisors. And it was 2 inches taller than everyone else because he's president. Here are some political cartoons. We have Khrushchev and Kennedy arm wrestling. They're both sitting on nuclear weapons. This is them trying to contain the nuclear war. It says, like, let's get a lock for this thing. That is JFK. That is Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union. And these are the images that we got from our spy planes flying over Cuba. There's the launch position, there's the missile ready tent, and there's the missile erectors to like aim it up and like shoot it off. So confirmed, these are not defense missiles. These are offensive missiles, and this isn't good. This is not good. This book right here is called The Kennedy Tapes, and I have lots of markings in it. JFK, because he understood the seriousness of the situation, recorded all of the meetings. So all of the meetings that JFK would have with his advisors, Secretary of Defense, you know, everybody that had like military experience, right? These people who were the best of the best, and he trusted them because he didn't want it to fail like the Bay of Pigs. He would record them secretly, and actually when he would walk in the room, it would just be like a light switch, and it would turn on the microphones. Nobody knew, except for the Secret Service agents, that they were being recorded. So like nobody was saying something just for the microphones. Like, this was genuine, and these are the transcripts of all the days of the Cuban Missile Crisis right here. So you can see like how long they were meeting to talk about this stuff because it was so serious. So this is 1962, and in the last video for the Berlin Crisis, I told you that my dad actually was drafted for the Berlin Crisis. He that was the second time he was drafted. He was drafted for the first time in 1959. He went to Georgia for basic training and then sent to Germany. And then he came back in 1960. He was here in the States for a bit. And then he got drafted in 1962 as a direct response to the Berlin Crisis and how serious the situation was getting. So this second time was a mistake. He knew that he shouldn't have been drafted again because he was already drafted. He already served his time. 1962 comes around, gets drafted, gets sent to Georgia for basic training again, and then goes to Germany to protect the citizens of West Germany. He didn't want to say anything to the federal government because he didn't want to say oh, this is a mistake, because he just became a citizen and he didn't want to get in trouble or anything. So he was actually telling one of his friends, and his friend was like, "Oh, you want me to take care of it for you?" And my dad was like, no, don't talk to anybody. I'm going to go to Georgia. I'm going to do my basic again, and I'm going to go to Germany. I'm not going to get in trouble. I don't want to ruin my citizenship. And the poor guy had to go through basic again. So he knew it was a mistake, but he couldn't do anything about it. Actually, in this book, there is a section on Tuesday, September 4th, 1962 at 5:55 p.m. The Secretary of Defense, his name was Robert McNamara, is telling JFK that they need to draft 250,000 soldiers. My dad was a part of that, and that was the mistake. All those people had already been drafted. The government makes mistakes too. So it's just kind of cool that there's the spot that my dad was drafted for the second time. You actually see a lot of the letters between JFK and Khrushchev, and Khrushchev writes to JFK, "You are threatening us with war, but you well know that the very least which you would receive in reply would be that you would experience the same consequences as those which you send us. That's mad. That is mutually assured destruction." Khrushchev is writing this to JFK. He signs it at the end, "Respectfully yours, N. Khrushchev." These two were very calm about the situation, and actually were very lucky that it was those two that dealt with this. Eventually, they removed their missiles, and the Cuban Missile Crisis ended, but it was very tense and very serious. Watch the TED Ed, it explains everything.